My beloved child, don't skip this, because what you are about to hear may completely change the way you see your soulmate. You thought their distance meant they were losing feelings. You thought the silence meant they had moved on. But there was something happening behind the scenes that you were never meant to see. While you were wondering why they weren't coming closer, they were quietly making a choice that could change everything between you. And the shocking part is this: their loyalty was never the question. The real question was what they were sacrificing in silence just to protect the connection they still believed in. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you. There were moments when they could have spoken, but they stayed quiet. Moments when they could have walked away, but they remained emotionally connected to you. And there is one hidden reason behind that behavior that you may never have imagined. They were watching, waiting, and trying to understand whether the bond between you was strong enough to survive without constant reassurance. They didn't want to make a temporary decision about something they considered permanent. So instead of chasing you, they started working on themselves. They changed habits. They reconsidered old decisions. They quietly let go of things that once distracted them. And the strangest part? They may have been preparing for a future with you without telling you they were preparing at all. But now comes the part you absolutely cannot miss. There was one specific moment when something happened that made them realize they could no longer pretend they didn't care. Something connected to you brought an old memory rushing back, and suddenly their entire perspective shifted. They understood that losing you would not simply mean losing a person. It would mean losing a chapter of their life they had never truly finished writing. That is why their silence may have looked like rejection when it was actually hesitation. Their distance may have looked like indifference when it was actually emotional preparation. And what they decided to do next is the part that could shock you the most. Stay with me, because the next revelation goes deeper than anything you have heard so far. Part 2. There is something they never told you about the time they were away from you. While you were wondering what they were doing, they were quietly putting pieces of their life back together. But not for someone else. They were trying to become the person they believed you deserved. Every time they almost reached out, they stopped themselves because they didn't want to return with empty promises. They wanted to return with proof. And that is why their silence carried a meaning you could never see from the outside. Don't skip, because the next part reveals what they were secretly preparing for. Then came a moment that changed their thinking completely. They saw something, heard something, or remembered something connected to you, and suddenly the feelings they had been trying to control came rushing back. They realized that no matter how busy life became, your place in their heart had never been replaced. That realization forced them to make a decision: stop running from the connection and start facing the truth. Something huge is waiting for you, because their loyalty was not shown through dramatic words. It was shown through the choices they made when nobody was watching. And here is the revelation you need to remember. While you were waiting for a sign from them, they may have been waiting for the right moment to give you something far more meaningful than a simple message. They were preparing to explain why they disappeared, why they became distant, and why they never truly let you go. There is a conversation they have replayed in their mind more times than you realize, and when that conversation finally happens, one sentence could explain everything. Stay till the end, because what they were really doing was never about replacing you. It was about becoming ready to face you again. Part 3. What happened next was something even they didn't expect. After spending so long hiding their emotions, they reached a point where pretending became harder than admitting the truth. They started revisiting the smallest memories of you, the words you once said, the moment you made them smile, the promises they never forgot. And suddenly, they understood something powerful: they had never actually moved on. They had only learned how to live with missing you. Don't skip, because this is where the hidden story begins to come together. Then they made a quiet decision. Instead of searching for another connection, they started removing the things that kept them emotionally stuck in the past. Old expectations. Old doubts. Old fears. They weren't doing this because someone demanded it. They were doing it because deep inside, they knew they couldn't ask for another chance while carrying the same version of themselves that had created distance before. They were preparing for a new beginning without announcing it. And the more they changed, the more certain they became about one person they still wanted beside them: you. But there is one detail that makes everything even more surprising. At some point, they began imagining what they would say if you suddenly stood in front of them. They rehearsed explanations in their mind. They imagined your reaction. They wondered whether you would believe them. And beneath all those thoughts was one fear: that by the time they finally found the courage to speak, you might have already closed the door. Stay till the end, because the next revelation is where their hidden loyalty becomes impossible to misunderstand. They weren't preparing to forget you. They were preparing to finally tell you why they never could. Part 4. There is a moment in every hidden love story when silence can no longer protect the truth. And your soulmate may have reached that moment. They had spent so long keeping everything inside that even the smallest reminder of you started feeling impossible to ignore. A familiar song, an old memory, a place you once mentioned, something unexpectedly brought you back into their thoughts. And this time, instead of pushing the feeling away, they asked themselves one question: what if I never get another chance? Don't skip, because that question changed everything. What they did after that was quiet, but powerful. They began looking at their own choices differently. They realized that loyalty isn't always about being physically present or constantly sending messages. Sometimes loyalty means refusing to replace something meaningful while you are still trying to understand it. They had opportunities to distract themselves, but their heart kept returning to the same unfinished story. And slowly, they started accepting a truth they had avoided for far too long: they still wanted you in their future. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you. And now comes the part they may have never expected you to discover. They started preparing the words they wanted to say when the time finally felt right. Not a dramatic speech. Not empty promises. Just the truth. They wanted to explain why they became distant, what they were doing during that silence, and why their loyalty remained even when you couldn't see it. But there is one sentence they have been afraid to say because once it leaves their lips, everything changes. I never stopped choosing you. And when that truth finally reaches you, you may finally understand why their silence was never the whole story. Part 5. But there is one final layer to this story that changes the meaning of everything you have heard. Your soulmate was not simply waiting for the perfect moment to return. They were quietly testing their own heart. They wanted to know whether what they felt for you was temporary emotion or something that remained after time, distance, and silence. And every time life gave them a reason to forget you, somehow, their thoughts returned to the same place. Back to you. Don't skip now, because this is where their hidden actions finally make sense. They began realizing that loyalty is often invisible. It doesn't always look like messages, flowers, or grand gestures. Sometimes it looks like walking away from distractions, becoming more responsible, healing old patterns, and refusing to make promises they weren't ready to keep. That is what they were really doing while you thought nothing was happening. They were changing quietly. They were becoming more certain. And somewhere along the way, they stopped asking, "Do I still love this person?" and started asking, "How do I become worthy of the future I once imagined with them?" And here is the revelation that may stay with you long after this video ends. Their biggest secret was never another person. It was the amount of effort they were putting into becoming someone who could finally speak honestly to you. They may still have doubts, but one thing became clear: the connection never disappeared the way you feared. So if their silence ever made you question your worth, remember this. Sometimes the person who looks the most distant is fighting the hardest battle inside their own heart. And when they finally tell you what they were really doing, you may realize that the story you thought was ending was actually being rewritten in silence. Part 6. And just when you thought you understood their silence, one final truth begins to emerge. Your soulmate may have been carrying a private promise, not necessarily one they spoke aloud, but one they made to themselves. They promised they would not return to you simply because they missed you. They wanted to return only when they could offer honesty, consistency, and a completely different version of themselves. That is why their actions seemed confusing from the outside. They were not trying to disappear from your story. They were trying to change the chapter before coming back into it. There were nights when they questioned whether you still thought about them. They wondered if you had finally moved forward. They imagined what would happen if they reached out and discovered that the door had already closed. Yet instead of forcing an answer, they continued working quietly on themselves. And something unexpected happened during that process. The more they tried to understand their own feelings, the more certain they became about yours. They remembered the moments when you understood them without needing an explanation. They remembered how your presence made ordinary moments feel different. Those memories became the evidence they couldn't ignore. But now, listen carefully, because this is the part that gives the entire story a new meaning. Their loyalty was not about waiting endlessly. It was about recognizing that some connections deserve truth before they deserve another beginning. And when they finally decide to speak, they may not start with, "I missed you." They may start with something much deeper: "There is something I should have told you a long time ago." Stay till the end, because sometimes one honest sentence can explain months of silence, and the truth behind theirs may be closer than you think. Part 7. There is one last thing you need to understand about their silence. They were not simply waiting for time to pass, they were waiting for clarity. Every day they asked themselves whether coming back would bring peace or simply reopen old confusion. And slowly, something changed inside them. They stopped focusing on what had gone wrong and started thinking about what could finally go right. That was the moment their hesitation began turning into determination. Don't skip, because this is where the hidden reason behind their loyalty becomes clear. They also realized something they had never fully admitted before: your absence had revealed your importance. When you were always there, they could convince themselves they had time. But distance made them understand that meaningful connections cannot always be taken for granted. They began imagining a future where they could actually speak openly, without pride, without pretending, and without leaving important words unsaid. And one thought kept returning to them again and again: if I get another chance, I won't waste it. Now the final piece is this. The real shock was not that they remained loyal. The real shock was why they remained loyal. Somewhere inside, they still believed your story had unfinished pages. They may not know exactly when or how the next chapter will begin, but they know what they feel. And if they finally step forward, don't expect a perfect speech. Expect honesty. Expect the truth they have been carrying quietly. Because sometimes the person who appears to have forgotten you is actually the person who has been remembering you the most. Something huge is waiting for you. And the next chapter may reveal what they have been preparing to say all along. Part 8. There was one final realization they could no longer escape. They understood that loyalty is not proven by how loudly someone claims to care, it is revealed by what they refuse to replace when nobody is watching. And despite everything that happened, their heart kept returning to the same unanswered question: what if this connection was never meant to end? That question stayed with them longer than they expected. Don't skip, because what happened after this realization changed the way they looked at your entire story. They began seeing your past differently. The misunderstandings suddenly had explanations. The silence had reasons. The distance had emotions hidden underneath it. They realized that both of you may have been waiting for the other person to make the first move, while neither wanted to risk being rejected. And then came the thought that shook them: what if you were waiting too? That possibility gave them courage. For the first time, they stopped imagining every reason it might fail and started imagining what could happen if they simply told you the truth. So here is the deepest revelation: your soulmate's greatest secret may not be something they did, it may be something they decided. They decided that if the opportunity ever came again, they would not hide behind silence. They would explain themselves. They would tell you what they felt, what they learned, and why they never truly replaced the place you held in their heart. Stay till the end, because the story does not end with their loyalty. It ends with the truth finally becoming impossible to hide. My beloved child, the silence is finally beginning to make sense. For so long, you may have believed your soulmate was simply living their life without looking back. But behind that calm appearance, they were carrying a question they could not escape: did I lose the one person who truly understood me? That question followed them through ordinary days, quiet nights, and moments when they had every reason to move forward. Don't skip, because the most unexpected part is still coming. Then something happened that made them stop pretending. They realized they were no longer afraid of admitting what they felt. They were afraid of reaching the end of their life with important words left unsaid. That realization pushed them toward a decision. They began imagining the conversation they had avoided for so long. No excuses. No confusion. Just honesty. And one thought became stronger than all the doubts: if I ever get the chance to speak to them again, I will tell them everything. Stay till the end, because this is where their hidden loyalty becomes more than a feeling. And now comes the revelation that connects everything. They were never simply waiting for you. They were preparing themselves for the possibility of finding you again as a better, clearer, more honest version of who they once were. Their silence was not proof that you meant nothing. Their distance was not proof that the connection disappeared. The real story was happening quietly inside them. And if the moment finally comes when your paths cross again, remember this. The person standing before you may finally be ready to say the words they have rehearsed in their heart for far too long. Something huge is waiting for you. My beloved child, this is where everything finally comes full circle. The question was never simply whether your soulmate stayed loyal. The deeper question was what that loyalty was preparing them to do. And now the answer becomes clearer. They were preparing to stop hiding behind silence. They were preparing to face the feelings they had buried, the memories they tried to outgrow, and the possibility that the connection between you was still unfinished. Don't skip, because the final truth is more emotional than you may expect. There is a moment they keep imagining, a moment when they can finally stand before you and explain what their silence really meant. They want you to know that while you were questioning everything, they were questioning themselves. While you wondered whether they cared, they were wondering whether they were ready. And while you thought the story was disappearing, they were quietly deciding whether they had the courage to begin again. That is what they were really doing. They were preparing themselves to tell you the truth without hiding behind excuses. And perhaps the biggest revelation is this: their loyalty was never meant to be measured by how long they waited. It was revealed through what they became while they were waiting. They learned what they wanted. They understood what they had lost. They recognized what they could no longer pretend didn't matter. And if their heart could speak to you right now, maybe it would say, "I never forgot what we were. I was only trying to understand what we could become." Stay till the end of this story, because sometimes the most powerful reunion begins long before two people ever speak again.